So Shion, do you have any advice for people who are seeking country property?
Yes, one of the many advice that I would say is that you will have to have a good understanding and idea of the country in which you're living in, or which continent you live in, because there are some places that you will experience the 4 seasons, right? In Jamaica, we're blessed by not having, we're very close to the equator, so our temperature and our climate is very modest throughout the year. We just have the wet and dry season. But if you're living in a place that has the 4 seasons, you have to really prepare yourself for what winter has to bring. Your planting seasons are going to be shorter, and you have to have provision for the winter in terms of whether it is firewood, to heat the place, especially if you're thinking about being completely off the grid. In terms of, for example, firewood, that's very important, not only for cooking, but for keeping your home warm during the winter. So you're going to have to think about, how am I going to store up that during the summer, during the spring, in preparation for the colder months in the fall and in the winter. Especially if you're somebody who is living off the grid, or if you live in a country location where there's just, there's no access to power from the line. And of course, even if you have your solar in the winter, it's very cloudy most of the time, so you may not necessarily end up having a lot of sun to charge your solar panel. So you have to be, I guess, wise in a way to think about alternative means of electricity during those times. Right. So that's something that we don't necessarily have to worry about if you live in somewhere like Jamaica or even Florida, wherever. But that's what you have to think about if you live in certain country. And I do believe that country living is not limited to a particular country. You don't have to be in the Caribbean. There are a lot of people who are practicing country living in Russia, Canada, all kind of different cold places. Right. But you have to make the necessary provision and know what you have to deal with in terms of the weather. The other thing that you have to think about is wildlife and just general safety of your family. Again, here in Jamaica, we're generally lucky as it relates to wildlife. We don't really have much in the sense of wildlife that we're particularly worried about. So in certain areas, you have to think about venomous snakes. You have to think about even something as potentially harmless as deer, because deer is not going to hurt you, but it can destroy your property, your fields, your crops, So you have to have fences that are, usually they recommend at least 8 feet tall so that the deer can't jump over it. Or there are other ways in which you can mitigate bears on your properties and so forth. Okay, you don't want them to come and damage your property that you work so hard to achieve. And of course, it goes without saying, when you have bears and those other deadly animals, they can be a threat to your safety. So a lot of times it may be important for you to have a gun on property, even if it's just a fire warning shot to get the bears off your property. So that's something that you have to think about, where you're going to go and what the wildlife is. What is the weather like? What is the planting season like? Are you going to be able to plant through the 12 months? If not, then what are you going to do? Are you going to get a greenhouse to extend your planting season? Are you going to start your crops from indoors, and then when it gets warmer, you transplant them outdoors? So these are different things that you have to kind of entertain as, where you're going to be living and what you need to do in that particular area to have the best potential outcome from your country living experience. Right. Thank you, Shion.